The original Zelda on NES was a classic, loved by the masses and known across the land as the first true adventure game. A Link to the Past on SNES shares that same mindset. Everyone loves these games, but is A Link to the Past really that good? Is the game still as fun to play as nostalgic fans claim? Today we'll be analyzing the gameplay to answer this, but I can't do this alone, so I've enlisted the help of another man who knows more about the Zelda series than I or any other person probably should. The Bread Pirate.
Hey, thanks for having me on the channel today. For those who don't know, I make lots of fun fact videos on my Zelda channel, so hopefully you'll check those out afterwards. Now then, let's get on with the show. Before we truly start, just a quick disclaimer that sometimes you'll see the words A Link to the Past on the screen abbreviated as ALTTP in order to shorten it. We're just doing that to save space on the screen. It's too long to write the whole thing out.
Now, if we want to talk about what makes A Link to the Past fun, we need to talk about the gameplay. A Link to the Past has the same style of gameplay as the first game in the Zelda series, with you going around the world and fighting in an overhead view, staying in said overhead view even in dungeons.
Dungeons in this game also retain all the best things from the original Legend of Zelda. You get to solve puzzles, fight monsters, find cool items midway through the dungeon, then get a boss key, and go slay a dragon or something. It doesn't get better than that.
In the overworld, you can explore the land and go through villages and other settlements, most of which have helpful items in there, like heart pieces or non-dungeon key items.
Okay, so far, so good. But what about the puzzles? I mentioned them, but we gotta talk about them. Thankfully, I can put your mind at rest. The puzzles in A Link to the Past actually feel like puzzles. For context, in the original Legend of Zelda, there were definitely lots of puzzles, but they were very hard to distinguish from just random scenery. There was no indication that certain walls were destructible or that certain blocks could be pushed. So, in order to really solve a puzzle, you just had to test everything, like everything in the room. On the other hand, in A Link to the Past, explodable walls have cracks on them, and blocks that you need to push stand out in some way, so the puzzles are much more enjoyable.
One problem I had playing was that the story seemed a bit unclear at times, as though the game was made for someone well-versed with the world it has. Saving Zelda is pretty straightforward, but getting into the first dungeon without a walkthrough is its own adventure.
You might even go as far as to call it an adventure of Link.
No, I wouldn't.
Okay, you're right. That was a really low-hanging fruit. I'm gonna go sit in the corner now.
Anyways, let's talk about combat. The best way to do this would be to compare the combat to Breath of the Wild. In Breath of the Wild, to fight an enemy, you are usually in a wide and open area, but it takes a lot of hits to kill the enemy. This amount of health is fair though, because you can dodge easily. Most enemies don't one-shot you, but in A Link to the Past, it's the opposite of that. Enemies have low health, but you can't really dodge them that much, and they hit like a truck. I don't think fighting in this game is that fun, which is kind of a shame because of how often you have to do it.
Retro combat is definitely an acquired taste. For some people it clicks, other people it doesn't. But let's move on from combat and finish up our discussion by talking about menus. It might not seem like a big deal, but menus do shape the way that you play your games. So how does A Link to the Past's menu system hold up? Well, I think you can say it's functional. I mean, yeah, it's not terribly slow and it tells you everything you need, but the real problem comes in with the fact that you can only equip one item at a time. So every time you want to experiment with a different item, you gotta go back to the main menu and switch your item out, which can get pretty tedious pretty quickly.
Even though it's difficult or frustrating at times, this isn't a bad game. Sometimes the challenge of fighting in this game is what interests me in continuing. Solving the puzzles in dungeons, or just figuring out how to enter them, is a lot less difficult than we may have suggested.
I mean, we certainly wouldn't make this whole video just to tell you that the game sucks. But we just want to point out some of the things you should be aware of before you dive into this classic. As far as Super NES games go, A Link to the Past is absolutely one of the best.
There it is, folks. Clear reasoning to the greatness of A Link to the Past. It was arguably a masterpiece in the 90s, and it still holds up to this day.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the video. I've been the Bread Pirate.
I've been the Gamer 500.
and we'll see you guys in the next one.